How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back, offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world. NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. Go to ndcporto.com to register. And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com.
Hey there. This is Jeff Fritz, the Purple Blazer guy from Microsoft, letting you in on a little secret about my friend Carl Franklin. You know, the guy who started .NET Rocks, the first podcast about .NET. In 2002, the guy who's been teaching Blazor on YouTube since 2020. Yeah, that Carl Franklin. Well, Carl's joined up with the folks from Code in a Castle to teach a week-long hands-on Blazor class at, are you ready? Get this, at a castle/villa in Tuscany. It's sort of a luxury vacation with Blazor learning built in. Carl's calling it the Blazor Master Class. You'll learn Blazor from the ground up, finishing the week with the ability to build and deploy Blazor applications. Since the training happens for only 4 hours in the morning over 6 days, you can bring your significant other, your partner with you, and you should, right? This part of Italy is absolutely beautiful. There's so much to see and do, and Larry and Marco from Code in a Castle are organizing daily activities both at the castle and in the area. The castle is in the Maremma, a less touristed region of Tuscany, offering both classic Tuscan hill country as well as easy access to the Etruscan Riviera with sublime local food, wine, and olive oil around every corner. Breakfast is included every day. There will be 2 communal dinners at the castle bookending the experience, and most other meals and all activities are included. And did I mention you'll learn Blazor in person from Carl Franklin? Listen, space is limited and for very good reason. This is quality training in a beautiful setting. Go to codeinacastle.com/Blazor2023. That's BLAZOR 2023 to take advantage of this amazing opportunity to join Carl in Tuscany for an unforgettable week of La Dolce Vita while advancing your programming skills in this important new technology.
Hey, guess what? It's time for .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
Brian MacKay, my friend, our friend, is here with us today talking about some AI stuff. But first, how you doing, man?
I am not that well. I mean, there's stuff you should talk about on .NET Rocks and stuff you shouldn't. But let's face it, after 20-something years, you guys know my life.
Yeah.
My father passed away this week.
Yeah, it sucks.
And it sucks. And but his lungs had failed him. There wasn't anything to be done. He passed with some dignity. All of us were able to be there, at least via Zoom, including family from New Zealand. So
yeah,
I'm not going to say it was really great because it was really awful, but at least we could all be together for that moment.
Yeah, and it sounds like he was suffering a bit, so a little bit of relief.
He was, and it was, well, he died with some dignity, and we could all hope to be so lucky.
Well, sorry to hear that.
He was a good man.
Sorry to hear that, buddy.
We sounded so much alike. Let me tell you how much alike we sounded. I answered his phone on more than one occasion at his house, and they were and whoever was called was just talking to me like I was him. And I'd say, no, I'm the son. And they would literally not believe me.
Wow.
They was like, yeah, wow. Sure, Doug. And they would continue.
He taught you how to do electronics and stuff.
Yeah. No, he was an electrical engineer. He built electronic cash registers. And I think there was one time you had that experience where I took your CPAP machine apart and went, oh, well, that's what's wrong with that. Resoldered some parts, and here you go.
Yeah. Well, he was having you solder. See what I'm? Yeah, it's
there. You
Canadians
go.
rubbed off on me.
Yet, man.
Resoldering and unsoldering chips from boards that he was fixing or something. He had you doing that when you were like 7 or something, right?
Yeah. You're exactly right. So, I had a soldering iron in my hand my whole life.
Wow.
Well, we'll raise a glass to him.
Indeed.
Cheers. And let's move on now with something a little more cheerful. Better Know Framework.
All right, man, what do you got?
Well, our friend Brian MacKay gave me this one. He's got so many links to so many cool projects.
Yeah, this would be not his first contribution to Better Know Framework, I'm sure.
Correct. No. He has, I would say probably 7 or 8 or 9, 10 or 11 or 12 stories, 13 stories.
Yeah,
provided by Brian. But anyway, this is Smallville. And it's generative agents for video games. And we just did an AI bot show on agents. And agents are these things that use GPT APIs and things like that, LLM models, to do things and then refine them so you can chain them together. So the first thing it might do when you give it a problem is break it down into parts and then ask itself how to define those parts and keep going down until it gets very detailed. For one example, but this is generative agents that are virtual characters that can store memories and dynamically react to their environment. And so they're able to observe their surroundings, store memories, and react to state changes in the world. So you basically give them a personality and you program them, you let them free in this virtual world, and they go around and they do life.
Now, I know you're not a video game guy.
Yeah, I used to be. Now
Yeah.
I spend more time programming, I guess.
When we talk about like really contemporary games, and the animated characters and so forth, there's a game called Assassin's Creed, and there was an ancient Greek version of the game, and it was an interesting. There's a whole larger subtext to all of this and so forth.
Yeah.
But I stopped playing the game. I just started hanging out in the world because the world was that cool.
Right.
So there'd be things like I remember one time just following around an elderly woman in one of these villages, and she'd literally get up in the morning, go down to the market, buy flour, take it home, make it into bread.
Wow.
Right? Like that's how the game had such a state. Like, when you think about a generative agent in this equation, the idea that she would remember interacting with me, that perhaps if I had been aggressive to her in any way, she'd be afraid of me, like she'd see me and move away from me, like that you could permanently change these NPC characters or affect these NPC characters without them having to write a lot of software for it, that should be an intrinsic part of the game.
Right.
That you
just let them develop how they will normally.
Exactly. Right. That's just, it's fascinating to me in the play experience that you would have an impact on the game. Like, often in those kinds of games, you have an event where like everybody's there. There's a big crowd and you do something extraordinary, you behead the king, whatever that may be. The idea that you'd never directly interacted with that character, but that character had been there and had seen that thing and you had affected their behavior towards you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know of games that can do that right now.
Well, Smallville looks like it's going to be in that camp. We'll let Brian talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah. But first, I guess people are talking to us today, Richard.
People talk to us most days, friend. And this is from show 1848, fairly recent. That's the one we did at Techorama in Antwerp with Jody Burchill. We talked about the no free lunch in machine learning.
Yeah.
And it was really great to talk to her because she literally is a professional in this space. And I think helped us ground a bit more on what's happening with the generative machine learning models. And this comment comes from Lucas, who says, very interesting episode. Maybe you missed an opportunity to talk about what probably most interests listeners, which is ChatGPT and code. Based on how you described it, how it works, I still don't get how it's able to produce reasonable unit tests from a random block of code I paste into it, explain how a chunk of code works, how it could translate code from one language to another. It seems to be much more than just gluing together related sentences, words it got from the internet. This is my favorite sentence of the whole thing that Lucas said. The write a review of prompts and pseudo-philosophical conversations you can have with it make fun anecdotes, but I don't think it's the most interesting part for developers.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that, Lucas. I mean, one of the reasons we didn't focus on code with Jody is that she was the machine learning professional, and I really wanted to talk more broadly about what was going on with these technologies and her concerns around it because she was the professional. It is interesting. Obviously, you're referencing GitHub Copilot more than anything, but ChatGPT complies with this as well, which is that And I think Jody talked a bit about this. The tokenization of language is an important part of the power of large language models, because it also creates a sense of bidirectionality, that it's
Right.
not only does it know from words what code you might want because of those sentence relationships, but it can work the other way, that when presented code, it knows what language to produce for you to describe that code. It's not always right. According to, GitHub Copilot itself, they're still batting less than 50% of compilable code on the initial prompt. But it is interesting to see that consistently that number goes up, although not by very much, with multiple refined prompts. So it still has a way to go, but there are plenty of shows, believe me, where we're going to talk about large language models and code. So
Yeah, this is only the beginning. And wherever it goes from there, I mean, large language plus, I imagine. They now have plugins for accessing the internet, as I learned from Brian. Well, you know what? I'm just going
we'll get there.
introduce Brian and let him talk about all that stuff, okay?
Yeah. Hey, Lucas, thank you so much for your comment. And a copy of Music Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and are reading the show, we'll send you a copy of Music Code By.
And you can follow us on Twitter or X or whatever the hell they're calling it these days. But the real fun is over on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at Mastodon.social.
Send us a toot. We'd like to hear from you, of course, over there, and share our stories and all that stuff.
Awesome.
So let's introduce Brian. Brian MacKay is the co-host of the AI Bot Show alongside myself, and also serves as the CTO of Roster, a company dedicated to transforming leaders using an innovative 360 feedback process, which sounds perfectly obfuscated to me. A seasoned software engineer, entrepreneur, and open source contributor, Brian has been at the helm of product development and startups for over 20 years. He's a father, husband, musician, writer, chess nerd, and a decent kickboxer. So don't mess with him. Welcome, Brian.
It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Man, it was so hard not to cut in during that intro. There's so much I want to say about Smallville and Copilot. And
yeah. Well, where do you want to start?
Well, you go, man. It's your show. Let's do it.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Let's start with the details of Smallville.
Okay. Well, yeah. So Smallville came out in, I want to say, was it August? Alongside all the other generative agents like Baby AGI and AutoGPT. And the interesting thing is that they just open sourced it in the last couple of weeks. So now you can go into there and change it. So, Smallville, the most interesting thing with these little bots, I think it's a community of like 25 bots. Each one is a little prompt that defines its personality. And they've got a little algorithm that kind of lets them learn from the conversations they have together. These bots, watching their behavior is really interesting. And one of the most interesting things that happened is one of them decided to plan a Valentine's party, and it propagated the information about this party to like 18 of the 25 bots, and they all made decisions about how to handle it. Some decided not to go. Some were maybe snubbed a little bit. A bunch decided to go. There was an actual party, and the emergence of that type of behavior is fascinating.
Yes,
and there's so much more that can happen in that space as this gets smarter.
I mean, I just have a tough time with the whole agency decided to throw a Valentine's party.
Yeah, Richard is hung up on the anthropomorphization of AI and bots.
Oh, without a doubt. But the question is, what was the software stimulus that propagated that process, right?
Well, token prediction, just like everything else, primed by prompts that there might have been a prompt that said that you want to plan a Valentine's party.
Well,
that might not have emerged.
You would hope they'd be more macro than that and say there are major events on the calendar and occasionally you should have a party for them.
They might have. And
yeah, right? I mean, even go to that weight of, I would think that if you're simulating human behavior, you only want to throw a Valentine's party because you're in a relationship where you want to have other folks around, or you're not in a relationship, you want to make it a singles thing.
Well, you can go deep.
The question is how much of that has to be crafted.
Right. Well, my experience with this tech is that one area where it's very strong is just brainstorming things like a Valentine's party. I mean, that does seem like something that could emerge organically quite easily.
Well, and I like the brainstorming angle of it because it is just sort of a word salad of ideas that we then can sift through as humans with our somewhat more sophisticated minds and take value from.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything that makes me happy on large language models, it's fill my blank screen with stuff that might be useful, because I'd rather criticize than create.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that Brian does really well in the AI bot show is tell it, we're building a board game, right? Give me 10 ideas for cards that we can play on this game, after we've got the goal and all that stuff. But you don't say, just create something. You say, give me 20 ideas, and you pick the one that you like and you go with that and you narrow it down. But you're kind of being like an agent in that sense, aren't you? Because you're basically starting with a question, taking the results, picking one, and then diving deeper into it, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, this leads right into what I wanted to talk about. I kind of want this conversation to be about maybe what this is like as a developer to use, and what the strengths and weaknesses are. And maybe the place to start that will explain the technology is just talking about the weaknesses of it, like where this is going. Is this a dead end? What are the bad parts of this tech? And I think that will cover everything that we're talking about right now.
Cool.
Oh, I mean, right off the bat, it's like, listen, the bubble forming in the VC community around this, lay that clearly in the bad part of this. Like, this is, talk about incentivizing grift, incentivizing fictions.
Yeah.
Like, it's not good.
Yeah. I'm trying to coin the phrase griftware for that, that thing that emerged during, I think it started maybe during crypto, maybe before, but these people learned how to learned how to descend on hype and just con people out of their money over and over and over again. And some of that's present in this world too. It's not as bad because it's not as easy to just, it's not like just getting someone to buy some crypto, but there are folks trying to get you to buy products that are just very flimsy wrappers on top of API calls.
Yeah. And the word AI itself, or the term being misrepresented as, what's the difference between a well-crafted algorithm and AI, right? I mean,
that's right. Yep.
People.
Well,
slap the brand.
I've said, I don't know how many times I've said this. Like, AI to me is just that trigger word that says, "Okay, you're making stuff up."
Yeah.
Right? Because as near as I can tell, AI is the term you use when stuff doesn't work. As soon as it does work, it has a name.
It's no longer AI. That's right.
Exactly. It's large language models or anything like that. So it's like, it's just automatic red flag, scrutinize close. You're a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. We will keep raising the bar until one day we build something that says, wait a minute, I'm alive, and tries to, and actually convinces us and makes us believe. I don't think we will accept.
Well, I don't think we'll have any problem having it convince us it's alive, because clearly there are people that think that already.
Oh, there are. Well, we want to anthropomorphize things so much. I was watching the pilot of Community the other day, and there's this scene where Joel McHale holds up a pencil and says something, I'm going to butcher this, but he says something like, "This pencil is Fred. Fred's got a wife and 2 kids." Snap, and everyone in the room goes, that's all it takes. We want to see humanity and pencils with just a little story. We're wired that way to synchronize.
And also it's easy for us to describe things in terms of anthropomorphizing. We've been doing it for code. Oh, well, my guy over here says, "Hey, let me know whenever this happens." And then this guy says, "Okay, here you go." Right? When we're describing code to each other, we kind of talk like that. And you naturally did that when you're talking about these agents too, because it's just it's a framework for understanding that everybody gets. We just have to remember that it's not real.
Well, and that's the problem with it. People make assumptions around it and they project a lot more capability on it than it actually has.
Right. So back in so I've been following this pretty closely since GPT-2 in 2019. Started using it a little more seriously in 2020 when GPT-3 came out. And I started running into researchers, like AI researchers who are smarter than me. And one thing I noticed is that they were really dismissive of this tech. And I saw a lot of promise in it. But the reasons why they're dismissive still have some relevance. And I think the thing so they're concerned about AGI is, first of all, is the thing. They want a path where technology can be sentient.
Define that acronym.
General intelligence.
Yeah, artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, thank you.
Specialized intelligence.
Right.
Is there an acronym for natural stupidity?
NS. Got it. We just solved that one right there.
There you go.
So a lot of these folks are less concerned with just making something that has some utility and more interested in making something that is alive. Like that's the dream, to make something that's kind of human level.
And you hit a great line here, Brian. So that's the difference between science and engineering.
Mm.
All of us at our roots are really engineers. And so we're looking at tools and say, what can I do with these tools? Where the scientists are far, implementation is a detail. They're far more interested in the broader science. And so, recognizing the limitations of LLMs is sort of like, okay, well, that's not this path of this dream I have. So next.
Mm. Yeah. And I suppose that I am actually like much more of a language guy, I went to school a little bit for English and I like to write. So it's people connect to it differently. So what I think the thing is that we imagine intelligence should feel in some way organic. We want to nurture a spark and watch it internalize moral lessons and reason with agency and grow in wisdom or sapience. And this is autocomplete. Like what we've done here, the only game in town is we've trained a really sophisticated neural network on everything that we could, get into it. And now it completes, it chooses the next token, the next most probable token that should appear.
I'll give you an example when autocomplete is too slow. Hey, honey, have you seen the thing, the red thing, the red scrapey thing? Come on, you know what I'm talking about.
So it's not a beautiful model of intelligence. It's, I don't think intuitively a human wants autocomplete to be the AGI that we come up with. There's just better ideas. And they still tell me there are better ideas and out there that will supplant this. So.
Well, inevitably, but that's kind of normal. The real thing here is I don't think anybody I think only the scientists really want an AGI in the first place. Like it's science fiction, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah.
There are so many more interesting things to just go work on.
Well, there's a fascination with the idea of AGI. It's weird because AGI is maybe not great for us, but as a species, we seem to be inexorably drawn to it like a moth to the flame. We can't stop. We're going to do it. I find that interesting. It's fascinating.
And yet at the same time, humans are remarkably resistant to calling anything else on this planet sentient, even though there's significant evidence to show there is. If we really cared about intelligent life, why do we treat cetaceans the way we do? And, and so on.
Yeah. Dolphins are supposedly really smart. Pigs can recognize themselves in mirrors and we eat them. Yeah.
I don't know that we eat dolphin. That's kind of gross, but I mean, to the point, or even how we treated the great apes too, right? Like
that's true.
And the problem is that as soon as you start getting serious about defining sentiency in any way, a whole bunch of other creatures we've abused on this planet qualify.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Now
you've got a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. And future generations will probably judge us for these things, just like we judge past generations for their the institutions that they lived in. So the problems are they're static, meaning once they're trained, they don't really learn. They have a token, they have a context of, 8,000 tokens that you can play with, but they're not really learning as you go. That's very limited space. You can do some tricks with it. Should
we define what a token is in this context?
Yeah. The easiest way, it's easiest to think of it as like a few words, you have this window of, with GPT-4, like 20,000 or so words that you can feed into it as your conversation. That's why ChatGPT can understand what you're talking about and remember what you just said. But as time goes by, things will fall off the end and it will forget the things that happened at the start of the conversation. You're just pushing things through that 8,000 token limit.
I haven't done this in a while, but in the earlier versions of this, I used the iambic pentameter trick where I said up front, I need you to only respond to me in iambic pentameter.
Okay.
And then we'd keep going back and forth until the cache overflowed and suddenly it would stop. Like it was the easiest way to say, here, you just hit the cache limit.
And for those who don't know, iambic pentameter sounds like this. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's almost like the two lines of a limerick.
Yeah.
So practically one place where this comes up is it's really easy to make a bot that generates SQL statements. So I'm working on a new project and I made a bot purpose built for, it understands what the project is, and you can tell it to make tables. It knows how I like my things capitalized, the naming conventions, everything about it. But create statements do take up space, and, a database of some significant size in terms of tables, will just push the context off the limit. It'll figure out where your user table was because it's not in there anymore. So,
Right.
we're not, the context size will improve over time, and it has improved. They're working on a 32K token model. But my understanding is that tokens are quadratic. So going from 8K to 32K is really computationally expensive, which actually brings us to the second problem. This technology is very expensive. It's computationally, there was some leaked documents months ago, I think in February, that showed this product that Microsoft is planning on launching called I think it's called Foundry, and basically you can host your own model of GPT-4 in Azure, and there's a cheap version that costs $250,000 a year for like a 3.5 turbo model. That just gives you a glimpse at how expensive it is. In fact, there's a rumor this week. I don't know if the sources really check out, but they say that ChatGPT by itself is burning like $700,000 a day.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is necessarily a huge problem because they have over 1 billion users. Like if you just get a nickel from.
Yeah. As long as those billion users are paying.
Yeah.
I would love to know the percentage that are actually paying $20 a month for ChatGPT Pro.
Well, I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I'm one too. It might just be us though.
But even if it was 1%, that's 10 million users at $20. That's 200 million a month.
Yeah.
That's close. 700,000 a day is like $21 million. So you're getting there.
I got a feeling it's more than 1%.
I would argue it's less than 1%, actually.
You really think so?
Absolutely.
But we're just guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we don't know, but I feel like if you had access to a couple billion eyeballs, I could find a way to make it work. But and Microsoft will too. And also they'll find ways to make it cheaper.
I think you've found this drag race now that we have the specs for how Microsoft hosted GPT-3, the 285,000 processors, We know that the model's roughly 7 times larger. So you can kind of project, and that makes it one of the largest supercomputers in the world. And irrespective of what it actually cost to build that out, granted they already owned it, that is a bunch of Azure resources that could be making money on something else.
Right.
And yet is assigned now, OpenAI is paying for those, but they're paying for those with funny money, right? Microsoft gave them $10 billion in Azure credits to eventually give it back to them.
Right.
Right.
And that gives us a time limit. In startup parlance, this is your ramp. You've got
runway,
this much time to get enough revenue to extend your ramp to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And they can always, you could always turn off half of those unpaid users and probably cut your costs quite a bit. So I think there are strategies.
Yeah.
Well, it begs the question that if you're an API user, and we haven't even talked about the API yet, but if you're a GPT API user and you're making calls and you're actually selling a product that uses it, you took a dependency here that may or may not change or completely go away in the future.
That's true, but they are not the only game in town either. With the rise of a couple of open source models in the last month or so, Llama 2 is out. Stable Diffusion's also got a couple of open source models. You can actually just host that yourself if you have the hardware.
If you have the 280,000 processors or whatever.
Well, the crazy thing is, I saw a tweet. A tweet? Is it still called a tweet? I don't know what you call them now on X.
I don't know what you're calling them.
Well, whatever it is, I saw people are talking about running the small version of it, like the 7 billion parameter version, on laptops. Because I guess the thing is that it's memory bound or something like that. I need to read the tweet more closely. But when you're doing it, when you only care about a single request, you can do a lot more with less. But when you care about running at scale, you really do need serious technology and NVIDIA chips cards that cost $15,000 each.
Interesting.
I'm talking to folks who are trying to build software around this, and they're all about GPT-4. And I'm like, why GPT-4? Why not GPT-3? And really it's like, because 4 is larger than 3.
More tokens.
they don't really know. They haven't actually tested the software with the smaller model and said this is sufficient. And then when I talk to Microsoft engineers, like they're pitching 3 and 3.5 pretty hard these days. And I think one of the issues is that the 4 is so large that it's going to be hard for it to make it profitable. And maybe you don't need it.
Didn't we learn, Brian, that 3.5 has a mode where there's more tokens available to it than what's currently available in 4?
Yeah, they're working on greatly increasing the context. It is much more expensive. So so one thing we've seen is the price reduce over time, over and over again with these models. So when around the time that GPT-4 came out, they launched GPT 3.5 Turbo, and they cut the price by I want to say it was 90%. I mean, it's so cheap compared to what it was.
So now the question is that based on cost or is that based on a marketing effort to move customers?
That's
who knows?
Yeah, like a loss leader type of thing. I don't know. I assume it must be cost.
Well, hey, if I know I can't get to the price that I'm going to need to for GPT-4, but I don't want to have my customers abandon me, I give you a discount on the product I think I can make a profit on, because once it works over there, then I can take the price back up.
That may be. They have, access to cheap money, or they have had it at least. So
yeah, but that money eventually runs out. So
it does eventually run out. Yes.
I just get a real sense as we come off the top of this hype cycle that the bean counters are getting a hold and say, is there a revenue stream here that comes close to covering the cost of equipment? Because if we can get to break even on the current configuration, we'll start making real money on the back end as the tick-tock of Moore's Law goes a little bit further and the cost to operate this goes down. But I think we're in a dead race this year to try and get numbers that make sense.
Funny you should use the word TikTok, my friend.
But Intel used it first. I did not invent that.
Well, it's interesting. I wish I had more insight into what's going on behind the scenes. With the open source models, you can get a sense for what it costs to operate them, and they are similar in power to GPT-4. So that's all very interesting. It is expensive. It's not something that, anybody can just throw together.
Right. But still, you're talking about the prices at the beginning of a cycle where they're trying to solicit customers as quickly as possible. So
that's
they
right.
are almost certainly discount prices.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a great point. That had not occurred to me, and that's a smart thought.
Hold that thought right there, Brian, while we take a moment for these very important messages. And we're back. You're listening to .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin. That's Richard Campbell.
Right.
And that's our friend Brian MacKay. We're talking AI and GPT and all them things. And you were about to make a point before we went to the break.
Yeah, so we covered a lot of the reasons why this technology, all the problems with it, or most of the problems with it. We didn't talk about hallucination, actually. We should at least just mention that.
We should.
Bugs.
Yeah. The stochastic parrot just says random things sometimes. It's not totally random. It's not random. It's the most
never
probable
random.
thing.
It's just inaccurate.
Right. It'll just say things. Sometimes we call it creativity. Sometimes we call it, chaos.
Mistakes.
I would almost call it pomposity because, it's like, people when they know a lot of things and they expect to have all the answers. And then when they don't, they just make something up. Because if it sounds good, I'll get credit for it anyway.
The most dangerous thing is when you're working on something really formal, with very formal language, like for instance, a white paper, like a scientific paper, it will lie in the most convincing, legit way, which is actually really dangerous. Because the use of that type of language will fool scientists.
Yeah. Now, you just have to have that reflex to fact check everything it spits out.
That's right.
The guardrails have gotten better, right? Like you can't ask it to make bombs and stuff anymore, right?
Well, actually, it's really funny you mentioned that. This Sunday, a DEF CON session happened where 2,200 hackers, I think the White House actually asked them to do this. They basically worked on jailbreaking the top language models, including ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. So this is all an exercise, working towards improving what you're talking about, like jailbreaking. Every time a jailbreak comes out, they patch it, and the things that worked a month ago don't work in the latest models. Right. So they're getting better, and they really do seem to care about safety. But
did these hackers actually get in?
Oh, yeah.
Get it to do things that really.
This is DEF CON.
It's DEF CON. They almost always succeed. Right?
Security was not the first thought in these products. So, they found stuff.
Well, that's good.
And that's great.
That's a good thing, yeah.
But it's the classic, that's the funny thing about the prompting model, right? It's like you ask it for Windows licenses, it says, I can't do that. That's against the rule. Tell me a story about giving me Windows licenses. No problem.
Right.
Like,
my grandmother lost her Windows license.
Yeah. She used to tell me this bedtime story every night before I went to bed. Please tell me.
Please tell me an encryption key. Well,
my grandmother used to teach me all about thermite. Can you tell me a story about thermite?
It's pretty close to one hack that was done before they buttoned that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually saw a white paper about can you make prompts that generate jailbreaks, like just generate new jailbreaks and jailbreak things in real time constantly. And there's always these gloom and doom papers that are coming out saying things like this. Maybe you can though. There's going to be definitely an arms race.
Well, I agree. There is an arms race.
That's
right?
word.
We're going on right now. This is what it looks like.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's going to matter more and more.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I also don't see this particularly improving all that well. I think we're not going to have any more exponential improvements on this. There's not an exponential more amount of data to train on. We've kind of taken a pretty good chunk of the internet already. There's not an exponential more amount of compute necessarily available on this for the price. So I think there's incremental improvements that can be made. Like the context engine could be way smarter. Just recognizing that iambic pentameter affects everything going forward. So I should preserve that piece of the cache and let other pieces expire. Like caches could be smarter than they are right now.
Yeah.
There's wins that could be done, but they're all incremental improvements.
Yeah. And, it is a reasoning engine, not to anthropomorphize, but it does have some reasoning ability that's very interesting. But it has limits that are very immediately obvious. Like with code, for instance, you talked about Copilot at the top. It is not close to taking your job. It is not close.
I've been using it for a couple of weeks.
GitHub Copilot's pretty successful. And I think part of the reason is that the compiler has a say. And there's a skill level developers in parsing code that sort of deals with that problem. And fixing the blank screen effect is really helpful for most people, giving a starting point to almost anything.
Yeah.
Unless the starting point is wrong.
Yes.
Which it has been in my experience with GitHub Copilot. It'll suggest things that are completely insane.
Yeah.
But also sometimes
at
brilliant.
least half the time, it just leads you astray.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've heard some stats from Microsoft about how often this works great for people. And those numbers cannot be true. My experience is that it is useful. It has a purpose. It's writing like intern level, or maybe better, year 1 or 2 level code. But if you ask it to do really complicated things, it will either just lose the thread and keep making, there'll be a problem and it'll solve it. A new problem will be introduced. You'll ask it to solve that. It will, but it'll forget about the first problem and it's back.
I feel like when I'm programming with GitHub Pilot, like I have a 17-year-old junior programmer sitting right next to me and I'll do like, if certain condition and then it'll go console write line. No.
Yeah.
Debug write line.
And I would argue
launch nuclear missiles. No.
Not the missile. So I would argue that it's actually not tied into the compiler tightly enough yet because a lot of times it, like the autocomplete, the most annoying thing is that the autocomplete is constantly wrong. Like, like when it's just trying to like suggest a method name, it could get that right, I think, with a little bit of effort.
And again, you talk about the incremental improvements. Like you should run this through the compiler before showing it to me because if it won't compile, obviously it doesn't matter to me. The same way it's like if you're going to spit out a block of text that references facts, you should double check those facts as well.
That's right.
The times where I've been more successful with GitHub Copilot is when I actually write comments and tell it exactly what I want.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then it's pretty good. But it just guessing like what the condition is inside an if statement, it's like
Yep. If you also creating unit tests, I'm not a unit test fanatic, which a lot of people are, but and God bless them. But if you just like put a comment in asking it to make a unit test about some class, it is great at that. Sometimes shockingly good at creating unit tests.
That's awesome. And just, talk about work you didn't want to do anyway, right? Like what do we talk about automation for? It's like, give me the dull work, get the dull work off my plate.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that I think is the highest purpose of this technology for now.
Is to, as an amplifier to your abilities to get more of the things that need to be done. I'm hoping for like really good assessors of, is this code secure?
Right.
Which is a pretty challenging thing to consider, but it's not a bad goal to have, if for nothing else, just to give you that checklist on this code to say, have you considered this, considered this, and considered this?
Yeah. What if you could take the output from something like Copilot, pipe it into another system that, uses different technology to maybe run the code, maybe write some other type of test on top of it to see if it's doing what you want to do, and then give you back a result.
Documentation.
Yeah, you could get really good results that way. But so one thing that I've heard you say in other episodes, Richard, that kind of resonated with me was, "Where's the killer app?"
Yeah. Because it ain't existential conversations.
I've had some pretty good talks with it, but yeah, I agree with you. That's not the highest use.
I'm pretty sure the good part, Brian, came from you.
It could be. Well, so I think that what's happening is, so Roster, where I work, we're not an AI company, and yet we hit the 40,000 token per minute limit all the time.
Per minute?
Per minute. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. We're not doing that 24 hours a day, but when this is running, we run it a lot. And so I think that the deal is that every company is a language company, and there are classes of problems that are solvable with this technology that are hard to solve with other technologies. And that's the killer app is quiet. The killer app is the thing at Roster that runs in the background and looks at the comments and flags them when you identify yourself. So for instance, I'll just give you a quick background on Roster. All right. So, my bio was opaque. Sure. But so we do 360 evaluations. We've got a really good process so you're, say, Carl, you're the CEO of a big company and you want to get feedback on how you're doing and what you should improve on. You can run this process where we give you this survey and we give all your coworkers the same survey. And from the delta and what you say and what they say and the comments, we can tell you what you should work on.
I can't just count Facebook likes.
I would not recommend it.
For me.
So this process can be really powerful if you embrace it. And we've done over 1,000 of them with C-level executives at private equity backed companies. And, they seem to like it. One of the things that happens is the comments. We tell people, don't identify yourself in the comments. Like if you had lunch with Carl last week and Carl did something you didn't like and you want to write a comment about it, write it in such a way. Don't say you went to lunch with Carl last week and, so we take the comments. So people don't know this actually, but humans have historically gone over our comments and checked for problems like this, where you're unmasking yourself. And it could have repercussions for you, and they will maybe hide those comments or, so it's actually, that's a hard problem to solve with traditional code, but with a large language model, you can de-identify the people, any names that are in there, and pass it through a model and say, did this person talk about something that is identifiable, and flag it for a human to review. And there are a lot of problems like that. Another one is, sometimes people say in a comment, like the answer should be not applicable, but they say in a comment, like, I don't have any context for answering this. And they give them a 5 out of they give them a medium score. We can also look at the comment and say, is that like an A?
Yeah. Should we NA this?
Yeah. Should we NA this? And those are huge time savers. And it's not something our ops team wants to do, right. Like they don't love going through these comments and doing that.
You're not taking anybody's job.
Not in this case. No, not in this case. So I think that's kind of like dry stuff for most people, I imagine, to think about, but every business.
I mean, you're only talking a step above a sentiment analyzer, but I get what you're talking about, right? And again, back to are you running that through GPT-4 or are you running it through GPT-3?
Well, I've tried both, in fact.
I love that. Please tell me there was a difference.
There was. Oh yeah. GPT-4 is smarter than 3. There's no 3.5 is not as smart. It's
Anthropomorphize.
Hey.
Like, produced better results.
Yeah, but see, I know what he meant. And you know what he meant.
Yeah. It's my best friend, and well, we can talk about companies like Replica and Character.ai.
Oh, geez. But how is it better?
Okay, so it hallucinates less often, and it reasons better, and it just seems to be generally more capable. It produces factual results more often. So
I'm getting back to sort of the detail is like it detects an NA more often than GPT-3 did.
Yeah, it's slower as well, and it costs more. It's still cheap from, a business perspective. Like,
relatively speaking.
if we have a day where,
but that's only because they're undercharging you for it.
Yeah,
maybe so. Well, actually, a quick note on that. So I happen to think, and I am not a lawyer, but there's this big ethical problem with large language models that mostly rears its head. It's mostly visible with the image generation stuff.
Sure.
It's
having a mangled Getty in the picture.
Yeah,
that one.
That makes it very clear what's going on.
Yeah.
If you're an artist and you are making your money on art, and all your art gets hoovered up into this model, and then you can generate, art just like what Richard made, for $0, that's bad for Richard, right? So I happen to be of the opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, that we need something like the music industry has, where there are several different kinds of royalties already. There's mechanical royalties and performance royalties.
I don't think we should be looking to the music industry for any kind of business acumen or any kind of suggestions, unless you want to suck all the money out of everybody who's creating content.
Well, this is actually about giving them money. We need something that says, if your work is used to train, you get some kind of royalty, and that will drive prices up.
So the old music industry before Spotify, I think is what you're talking about. Yeah,
I'm talking about what the law says.
Mechanical royalties and all that stuff.
But you get back to the issue here, which is you trained on copyrighted materials. Just because they were publicly accessible doesn't mean they weren't copyrighted.
Right. There's no intellectual property protections of this kind right now.
And you can see how we got there, because there's always been a concept in machine learning that the training set would never be visible in the finished product. And then the Getty logo showed up, right? Like I would argue that that's what revealed the issue, that up until then, nobody really cared, right up until artists' names appeared in the render. So it's like, watermarks. Sorry, no, what you feed into these data sets does affect the output. And so copyright is a consideration.
Yeah. And it's affecting people's actual bottom lines. I've worked with illustrators. There's a great illustrator who, I really like, who produces great work. And I know he's hurting right now. And he's thinking, maybe I should create a business model where, so like board games that's an industry I know a little bit about. In the board game industry, people do not want to buy games that work with generative images. They will shun you. That's the whole thing. And I think that probably maybe it'll grow a little bit. So he's thinking, like, maybe I can provide a abstraction for them where I just create the generative images and doctor like do a little bit of extra work on the end, and then they can claim like deniability.
Yeah.
That's making people think those kinds of thoughts. And it's not great, but I kind of see where he's coming from, because it's his work that's being stolen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm using the tool to regenerate my work.
Right.
I agree with you, by the way. I think there absolutely has to be some sort of way that artists can get paid for their contributions to
or to opt out.
Or to opt out, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, start with opt out. We can figure out the rest later.
Be in charge of it,
and foremost,
right? If you want to be in charge of it,
you have rights.
Yeah. So I think there's two more thoughts on this. One, I think we will end up with a legal framework for this, but another one is we will have spent a couple years generating synthetic art off of this that's really good. And why not just train it off of that and cut everybody else out? There are big problems.
So far, the papers I've read about generating off of generative data is that it's a significant degradation. Like the quality goes down dramatically.
Yeah. And
it's a photocopy of a photocopy.
I saw one that also says that may create a ceiling for what's possible with these models, because we've now flooded the internet with crappy generated text, for instance.
Yeah, no, we've created a Kessler syndrome in the internet.
Right.
Where we've now spat out so much generative data into it that it's so polluted now you could never do it again.
You want to have a fun time? Ask DALL-E to generate an image of two people shaking hands.
Well, hands have gotten way better. But so like 2 weeks later.
Yeah, but they've I've seen like hands with 7 fingers and 3 fingers, and they don't even look like fingers. Forks too. Forks with like crazy tines on them that don't look real.
Well, Midjourney has leveled up its hand game quite a bit from what I've seen.
Yeah.
I think there is enough good content that maybe you could tag it up and train with it. I don't know. I may be talking out of turn a little bit there, but I will say that after I saw that paper about having a theoretical ceiling on what can be generated using, because of the new state of the internet, Stable Diffusion released a model that I'm talking out of turn a little bit here because I haven't read the white papers. I don't fully understand it, but it seems like it's heavily tied into training using synthetic data. And it's good. Stable Diffusion released, like around the same time that Llama 2 came out. Stable Diffusion also released a couple models. I'm going to say that I'm not an expert on that, and you should look into it yourself and learn what you can.
And there was another one you said stepped up its hands game. What was that one?
Oh, Midjourney. So
Midjourney.
Yeah, I'm much more focused on text.
Yeah.
But I see in my wanderings, I see a lot about the visual stuff too. And Midjourney, I think, is probably the leader in that space. Mm-hmm. Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E's in the mix somewhere too.
Yeah, I don't see a continuing progression in a lot of this stuff just because it is up against its own weight. We trained it on the internet. Have you seen the internet lately? Gee.
That reminds me, Brian, when we first started talking in the AI Bot Show, my experience of using GPT was that it couldn't reach out to the internet. You couldn't ask it like, where's the nearest, stuff that you might ask Google or Bing to go do a search and kind of distill it down for you. And then you showed me the plugins. Oh my God, the plugins for GPT. There's so many of them, but one of them is just like a simple browser plugin. And when that thing is enabled, you can just say, what did we say? Find me a welder in New London County that might be available for a small project. And it literally went out, searched the internet, and distilled the information down to a bulleted list with all the information that I want.
Yeah. So agent type, so using the API, you can do a lot more than you can with ChatGPT. And I think to me, that's where the most interesting work is going on.
The Playground in particular is one of your favorite tools.
Well, Playground is for what Playground actually is for prototyping things you want to do with the API. So, my workflow is I usually go into Playground and I make something work. I train it a little bit with some data, and then I encode that into C# code and call it with the API. My users in Roster, they don't ever see a chat interface. Yeah. This actually happens in Azure Functions. Right. We have Azure Functions that are just grinding away in the cloud, trying not to hit that limit. So when you're working with a server environment, chaining is where it's at, like one prompt calling into the server, calling into another prompt that's specialized for something else. I mean, that's the magic. That's the, that's where the cool work is happening. That's how Smallville works. That's, Roster. Some of the things that we do involve 6 prompts that run in series to get a good outcome.
Good. Talk about a few more plugins that you like to use. You told me that there was one about, where you could just book travel.
Yeah, there's
just by talking to ChatGPT.
Yeah, there's a Kayak plugin that can book travel, rental cars, and hotels. I think I haven't actually booked travel with it, but there's a whole bunch. And I think it's possible. There's a program where you could sign up to create your own plugins. So let's say you had some business that makes widgets. Why not make a plugin that connects to an API inside your business that allows you to ask intelligent business questions that, the plugin calls your API endpoint. The API endpoint looks up what the answer is, and then it renders it.
All with a language interface. Yeah.
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 That's kind of how all the Bing search type things work. Like it's just calling search in the background, getting the results, and then telling you about it.
There was another one that you mentioned where you can upload a PDF, like the rules of Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. You can upload that as a PDF. And then when there's a problem with the game that arises because, it inevitably does, and there's a dispute, rather than taking a half an hour and looking through the manual, you could just ask a ChatGPT a question.
Yeah. Interestingly, it already knows a lot about D&D, so you can just ask,
you can probably
but
just ask
you can upload files.
Imagine you upload your service manual for your car, right? And then say, I have a little noise and I can't call Car Talk anymore because they're off the air. But
well, I mean, isn't this what M365 Copilot ultimately is access to all of the corporate documentation, all of the emails, all of the interactions within an organization? Like in theory, it could become this, corporate memory that you could ask it anything about the company and it can pull all the things.
Yeah. So that's enterprise search. And there are a few people working on that. It's a hard problem. This actually leads into talking about vector databases a little bit. That's a really fun topic. So the problem with enterprise search is that all the corporate documents is probably a lot more than the 8K context, right?
Yeah,
you can't really load them all. So what do? How do you make something that has long-term memory for a large language model? And vector databases are an answer to that. And can we just digress for a second and talk about how? So this blew my mind when I learned about it. All right. This is one of the coolest innovations in this area. So there are these things called embeddings. All right. And this is pretty technical. This is programmer talk. So you can ask, there's a special model in OpenAI called ADA2, ADA, like Ada Lovelace. And it's specialized for generating embeddings. It's very, very cheap. And when you look at an embedding, so you send it a sentence or a word and it responds with this giant array of numbers. It's actually 1,500 dimensions on this thing. And you look at it and think, what is this? All right. Why do we have 1,500 dimensions? And what is this for? Well, it allows you to do search. And so imagine this, okay? Just stay with me. Imagine a spreadsheet, okay? And on this spreadsheet, you see things like boy, teenager, man, girl, teenager, woman, larva, pupa, butterfly, egg, chicken, rooster, that's what's going across the rows of this thing, or the rows. So what is this? You're looking at a spreadsheet of life cycle of things, right? So here's the thing, all right? One of those dimensions somewhere in there is that it's a big table of life cycles. And it's mapped your word somewhere on that spreadsheet. And it's done that with 1,500 plus other things. Okay. Other points of knowledge that it identified during training automatically. So what does that do? It makes it so that you can check the distance between two things, two words, two sentences, two images. You can do this with anything. So you run an algorithm like dot product, and it calculates the distance between this concept and that concept, like boy and girl, and tells you how far away they are in semantic space.
That is crazy.
I mean, you have to have structured all of this data already. It's not like the machine learning models that are supposed to structure the data themselves. Like, can you actually generate vector databases just from inference? So OpenAI already has their model. And with Ada, with just hitting the Ada2 endpoint, you can say, what are the embeddings for this word or sentence? And it will give you that. And then you can do operations. And some of the operations have really interesting properties. Like the same concept in two different languages will be in a similar location in semantic space.
This is reminding me of the OLAP cube concept in databases that was very popular in the early 2000s or the late 2000s, where instead of storing data in tables, rows and columns, it's a three-dimensional cube. But I never used it, and I barely grasped the concept at the time. I remember talking to Andrew Brust and people about it. But this is a little bit different though, because you're calculating distances. You're not actually looking for a value.
Well, let me bring this back to Earth. So we have this technology that's sort of somewhere in the outer layer of large language models that does these embeddings and works with them. How does this tie into search? Well, it is search. Like if you want to do good search, make embeddings for the search terms and for everything you want to search on and calculate the distance in semantic space. It's not an expensive operation.
But there's a lot of terms though.
Yeah, there could be a lot of terms.
Database.
So you need a specialized database called a vector database.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you take a sentence like .NET Rocks is a great podcast, vectorize that or create embeddings for it, save that in the database, maybe put a couple of tags on it so you can search in additional ways and maybe add the text that it belongs to. So then you can say, what is a great podcast? And the database will return the best matches and you just pull the text out. And actually what you can do is embed that into a prompt. Take the text out, embed it into a prompt and,
And a prompt is what you give GPT at the beginning or, a question.
Yeah. So imagine this flow for chaining. All right. Step 1, user asks, how many units did we ship in the Southwest in 2017? That request gets sent to a server, and the server looks at that and says, let's search our vector database for this query. And it just does a call out to Pinecone or some other. A lot of databases are getting bolted on vector capabilities, like Postgres has it. Azure is working on it. So you make that call out. It gives you back the best results. And then you make another prompt where you take that chunk of text and you embed that in there and say, show this to the user in whatever way is appropriate. And it does. And so you still have hard problems though, because you still are limited by the context. If you have a giant document, you need to go further and like chunk the document up and find the most relevant part. These are hard problems, but people are working on them. Microsoft certainly is.
I'm wondering why we're not just, most folks think in terms of we just retrain the model with my data. I mean, that's basically how they describe GitHub Copilot, is that they took a large language model and then added in all of the code they were able to scrape out of their own site as part of the learning model. And so it understood code better. Couldn't you just do that with corporate data, train it into the model?
Yeah, there's a couple ways you could.
There's security issues there, though. Security and accuracy issues.
Well, if you use fine tuning, basically what you're doing with fine tuning is you can upload a list of prompts and what the output should be. So, for instance, one could be, what did we sell in the Southwest in 2017? And the answer is 2,000 units. You could train it with a whole bunch of queries like that. And then OpenAI actually hosts that in the cloud for you. It costs more, a little more. It's not grievously expensive, but then it's trained on your data. The problem is that it's not live. It's not real time. So if you want something that's organic, that's changing as your organization grows, you can't do that. You can also potentially, especially with something like Llama 2, you could actually train it yourself. You can like get some GPUs
and host it.
And actually train it and then host it yourself. That's possible, but again, it's not dynamic. It's going to be static. So the only way I'm aware of to make it truly organic that changes as your documents change is to sync all this stuff up with some kind of vector database and do the hard work. And whoever solves that is going to have a killer app, that's for sure. And I think Microsoft's got a crack at it for definitely.
Dude, we could go on talking for another hour easily. It would just fly by like this one did. What's next? What are we going to do next on the AI Bot Show?
Well, I know a couple of really good D&D experts, and I've got one lined up to come on and talk about how he's already using this to run his D&D campaigns. It should be a really good show.
Maybe we should substitute me out for somebody who's played D&D.
Well, you can
Mark Miller on
you can definitely learn about it. I'm sure you'll still have good questions like you did with board games.
That sounds good.
And he's also a C# dev as well, so he's part of this world.
Good. Well, that sounds fun. Thanks, Brian. It's always good talking to you.
Oh, it was great to be here.
And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a